The classroom was empty, the sun sinking low against the windows, yet I couldn't make myself leave. She smirked at me from behind her desk and said, almost daringly, "Class isn't over until I say so." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about lessons anymore. The classroom always felt different once everyone else had gone. The noise of the day, the scrape of chairs, the chatter of voices, all of it dissolved into a kind of sacred silence. Only the dust motes remained, drifting lazily in the fading sunlight that slanted through the blinds. I should have been on my way home like the others, but I lingered, my bag half zipped, a few books still stacked on my desk. She was at the front of the room, the way she always was, except now it wasn't the same. Without the rows of students between us, she seemed closer, more real. She leaned slightly over her desk, pen moving across a stack of papers, her brow furrowed just enough to make me wonder what thoughts were running underneath. Every so often, she'd pause, glance toward the window, and tap the pen against the edge of the page. I told myself I was just taking my time, packing up slower than necessary, but the truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to leave her presence. There was something about the quiet of that room when it was just the two of us. The smell of chalk dust still hanging faintly in the air, the faint perfume she wore, floral, understated, and impossible to ignore. My chair gave a little creak as I stood, and she looked up, just a glance, but it was enough to catch me in place. Her eyes, steady, unreadable, met mine for only a heartbeat before she dropped them back to the papers. Still, my chest tightened as if I'd been caught in something I didn't yet understand. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the rows of empty desks. She reached up absent-mindedly to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, and I caught myself studying the gesture, the grace in it, the unspoken elegance she carried without trying. She didn't look like the kind of woman who belonged to this room, with its scuffed floors and tired posters. She seemed like she belonged somewhere else entirely, somewhere brighter, fuller, but here she was, and somehow, so was I. I hesitated at the doorway, one strap of my bag slung over my shoulder. Leaving felt wrong, final, like stepping out into the hallway would close a door that wasn't meant to be closed. She didn't notice at first, or maybe she did and pretended not to. Her pen moved again, steady, precise, but there was the faintest curve at the corner of her lips. A smirk. Subtle, but it held me there. The silence stretched long enough to feel deliberate. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't just the empty classroom. It wasn't just the sunlight or the end of another day. It was her, and it was me, and it was the realization that I wasn't just another student finishing another lesson. Not anymore. I had almost convinced myself to leave. My bag was slung across my shoulder, my hand resting lightly on the doorframe. The hallway beyond was dark and hollow, lockers lined like sentries, the sound of my own breath echoing faintly in the stillness. All I had to do was step out. One step, and this strange weight in my chest might lift. But I didn't move. Something in me held back, some unspoken tug, like the air of the room had claimed me. She must have sensed it, because that's when her voice carried across the classroom, low, smooth, and touched with a hint of humor. "Class isn't over until I say so." I froze. The words weren't sharp or strict, not the way a teacher might scold a late assignment or careless remark. They were playful, teasing, but they held a weight that rooted me where I stood. I turned slowly, and there she was, leaning back in her chair, pen balanced in her hand, her lips curved into that unmistakable smirk. For a moment, I wasn't sure if she was joking, if this was just her way of lightening the quiet. But the way her eyes lingered on me said otherwise. They held me steady, pulling me back into the room like a tide drawing the shore. I let out a laugh, nervous, a little shaky. "I thought we were finished," I said, my voice softer than I intended. She raised a brow, the smirk deepening ever so slightly. "That's not really for you to decide, is it?" Her tone wasn't unkind. In fact, it made the air feel warmer, thicker, like the walls had leaned in closer around us. She looked at me the way someone studies a question they already know the answer to, waiting for you to catch up. I let the bag slip from my shoulder, the thud of it hitting the floor louder than I expected in the silence. The sound seemed to echo, but she didn't flinch. She only tilted her head, eyes still locked on me, as if she'd been expecting that very choice. I walked back toward my desk, slower this time. Each step felt deliberate, though I couldn't say why. She hadn't asked me to sit down, hadn't told me what she wanted, and yet the invisible thread between us pulled me closer. The sunlight had shifted by now, the last golden stretch cutting across her desk. It lit her hair in a way that made it shimmer faintly, strands catching the glow as she leaned slightly forward. When I reached the nearest desk, she finally looked down again at her papers, tapping her pen once against the wood. "Much better," she murmured, as though something had been restored. But the smirk remained. Quiet. Certain. A reminder that the moment wasn't about schoolwork or grades or anything written on those pages. It was about something neither of us had named yet, but both of us felt. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted the class to end at all. For a while, she didn't speak. The only sound in the room was the quiet shuffle of her papers, the scratch of her pen, the tick of the clock on the wall. I sat back down at my desk, my hand resting on the wood surface that still felt faintly warm from the afternoon sun. I should have felt like a student again, waiting for instruction, but the silence between us had shifted. Finally, she set the pen down with a soft click and looked up. Her gaze lingered on me a moment longer than was necessary, as though she was measuring something. "You're quieter than usual," she said, her tone gentle, not accusing. I shrugged, though my chest tightened. "It's strange, being here when it's empty. Feels different." Her lips pressed into a small smile, one that didn't quite hide the heaviness behind it. Empty is a good word for it. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms loosely, her eyes drifting toward the windows. "When the day ends and the noise is gone, this place can feel like nothing more than walls and dust." There was something in the way she said it that carried more than just observation. It sounded personal, almost confessional, like she was speaking to herself as much as to me. I hesitated, then asked quietly, "Does it ever get lonely?" Her eyes flicked back to mine, and for a second, I thought she might brush the question aside with humor. But instead, she let out a breath that softened her shoulders. More than I liked to admit. The honesty of it caught me off guard. Teachers, at least in my mind, had always been steady. Figures who carried authority without cracks. Yet here she was, letting me see something fragile, something real. She reached for her pen again, rolling it slowly between her fingers. "You know, people think this job is about teaching equations or essays. But it's not. It's about watching people walk in and out of your life. Every year. Faces that fill the room, and then one day, they're just gone. And you're left wondering if you meant anything at all." Her voice softened near the end, and she stopped rolling the pen. It lay still in her palm, as though she didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. I leaned forward slightly, my hands folded together on the desk. "You do. You meant something to me." The words slipped out before I could censor them. They hung there, raw and unpolished, and I felt my face heat. But she didn't dismiss them. Instead, her lips parted just enough to let out a quiet, almost startled laugh. Not mocking, more like she wasn't used to hearing that truth said aloud. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I noticed how tired they looked. Not weary in a way that diminished her, but in a way that made her more human. "That's kind of you to say," she murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her hand trembled slightly as she tucked it behind her ear, and for a fleeting moment, she seemed less like the figure at the front of the class and more like a woman sitting alone at the end of a long day. And in that moment, I realized I didn't just admire her for what she taught. I admired her for who she was when she thought no one was watching. She picked up a book from the corner of her desk, one of the thicker volumes that always seemed to appear whenever she wanted to make a point. The cover was worn, the pages soft at the edges, the kind of book that had passed through many hands and carried the faint scent of old paper. "You should take this," she said, holding it out casually. "I think you'd enjoy it." I rose from my seat, the scrape of the chair legs echoing through the quiet room. Crossing the space between us felt strangely significant, as though those few steps held more weight than all the hours of lessons we had ever shared. She extended the book toward me, her arm steady, her eyes on mine. I reached for it, careful, measured, and that's when it happened. Our fingers touched. It was nothing more than a brush, the soft meeting of skin against skin, but it sent a ripple through me that was impossible to ignore. Her hand was warm, steady, the faintest pressure lingering as if neither of us was in a hurry to let go. Time seemed to stretch. The late afternoon light caught across the desk, outlining her profile in gold, and for a moment, all I could hear was the soft rhythm of my own breathing. My heart drummed, not wildly, but with a deep, steady insistence that filled my chest. She must have felt it too, something, because she didn't withdraw right away. Her eyes flickered downward, just briefly, to where our hands overlapped, before lifting back to meet mine. And in that glance, there was something unspoken. Not an invitation, not yet, but an acknowledgement of the tension that had been building silently between us. Finally, she released the book, her fingers sliding from mine with a slowness that felt deliberate, even if she would never admit it. The loss of contact left behind a faint ache, as though my skin still remembered her warmth. I cleared my throat softly, trying to disguise the way my voice had tightened. "Thank you," I said, holding the book closer to me than necessary. Her smirk returned, but this time it was smaller, subtler, as if she, too, was aware of the thin line we had just brushed against. "Don't thank me yet. It's not an easy read." The attempt at lightness didn't erase what had just passed between us. If anything, it made it sharper, more undeniable. I stood there for a moment, the book clutched in my hands, the air between us thicker than before. She looked down again at her desk, gathering the scattered papers as though to ground herself, but I caught the faintest flush at the edge of her cheekbones, barely visible in the fading light. It was such a small thing, a book handed over, a touch that could have been accidental. But in that moment, it felt like the first step into something neither of us had planned for, and both of us silently wanted. The book still rested in my hands, though I wasn't really looking at it anymore. My attention kept circling back to her, the way she gathered her papers in careful stacks, the way she avoided meeting my eyes too quickly, as though the silence between us had suddenly become fragile. I set the book down on the desk nearest hers, my fingers tracing its worn cover absent-mindedly. "You've always chosen the hardest books," I said lightly, trying to coax her gaze back to me. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. "Maybe, but the difficult ones stay with you. They make you think." She paused, her tone softening. "Sometimes they even change you." Her words lingered in the air, and before I could stop myself, mine followed. "Like you did." The moment the words left me, I felt the weight of them. Too direct, too exposed. My heart pressed against my ribs, waiting for her to laugh it off, to redirect, to retreat behind the safety of her role. But she didn't. Her hand stilled on the stack of papers. Slowly, she lifted her eyes to mine, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Surprise, yes, but also a quiet ache. A longing that mirrored my own. I swallowed, my throat dry. "I mean, it wasn't just what you taught. It was how you carried yourself. The way you made the room feel different. Like we weren't just learning facts or writing essays. We were seen." I felt seen. Her expression softened, but her lips parted without words. She seemed to search for something to say, and when it came, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I don't think anyone's told me that in a very long time." I shifted closer, resting my hands lightly on the desk, careful not to close the distance too much. "Then they should have. Because it's true." She let out a faint laugh, though it trembled as it escaped. With her free hand, she brushed a strand of hair from her face. The motion was deliberate, but I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. Vulnerability flickered through her composure like light through glass. Her gaze dropped for a moment, then lifted again, steadier now. "You don't know what it means to be seen that way. Not anymore. Most days, I feel invisible. Just another person behind a desk." I shook my head, leaning just a little closer, my voice firm but soft. "You're not invisible. Not to me." Her lips parted as though she might respond, but no words came. Instead, her hand lowered slowly, resting on the desk just inches from mine. Not touching, almost. A gap so small it felt like the air itself was charged between us. We stayed like that, suspended in a silence that said more than either of us could. And in her eyes, I saw it clearly at last. The vulnerability, the quiet hope, and the faint, unspoken fear of what it might mean if either of us leaned too far across that fragile space. The silence between us had become something alive, something that pressed at the edges of my chest and stole the air from the room. Her hand still rested on the desk, inches from mine, and though we weren't touching, the nearness itself was enough to send a current humming through me. I shifted slightly, drawn forward by something I couldn't name, and the legs of my chair gave the faintest scrape against the floor. She didn't move away. She stayed exactly where she was, her eyes flicking to mine with a stillness that made every second feel deliberate. Her breath rose and fell gently, and I became acutely aware of it. The rhythm, the quiet catch as she held it for a moment too long before letting it out. I didn't dare speak. Words felt clumsy, unworthy of the weight that settled between us. So I stood, slowly, carefully, as if even the smallest movement might break whatever fragile thing had grown in that golden-lit classroom. I stepped closer to her desk, until the soft glow from the window caught across her hair, illuminating the faint lines of weariness at the corners of her eyes. But there was something else there too, something unguarded. She tilted her face slightly upward to meet my gaze. The angle made her look both strong and impossibly vulnerable, like she was daring me to come closer and fearing it at the same time. I stopped just beside her chair, the space between us reduced to a breath. The air was warmer here, carrying the subtle trace of her perfume, floral, faint, but unforgettable. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the heat rising through me. Yet I stayed still, waiting, searching her expression for any sign that I'd gone too far. She didn't turn away. Instead, her hand shifted slightly, just enough that her fingers brushed the edge of the book I still held. It was such a small movement, but it felt like the most deliberate thing in the world. Our eyes locked, and in them I saw everything words could not carry: the hesitation, the conflict, but also the unmistakable pull. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be this close." But she didn't move back. She didn't tell me to leave. And the tremor in her voice betrayed the truth, that she didn't want the distance any more than I did. I leaned in, not enough to touch, but close enough that I felt her breath mingle with mine. The charged silence stretched, and I wondered if this was what it meant to stand on the edge of something forbidden, yet inevitable. Every instinct screamed at me to close the last inch, to bridge the fragile space between us. But instead, I stayed there, suspended in the nearness, savoring the ache of restraint, the knowledge that desire was no longer hidden but not yet spoken aloud. And in that restraint, in that breathless pause, the moment became more powerful than any kiss could have been. The clock ticked softly on the wall, each second louder than the last, but neither of us moved. We stayed there in the fragile stillness, caught between the pull of what we wanted and the weight of what it might mean if we gave in. Her eyes held mine, steady but uncertain, as if searching for an answer we both already knew but weren't ready to voice. Then, slowly, she exhaled and leaned back in her chair. The shift was small, but it loosened the intensity just enough for me to breathe again. Her lips curved, faint, deliberate, into that familiar smirk. The one that carried authority, yes, but now something softer beneath it. "Class isn't over until I say so," she murmured again. The words were different this time. Not playful command, not a reminder of roles, but something gentler, an invitation. A promise that she wasn't ready for the moment to end any more than I was. I let the weight of the sentence settle over me before answering. My voice was quiet, careful. "Then I'll stay." Her smirk softened into something more like a smile. She reached for her papers, stacking them neatly, though her movements were slower now, as though buying herself time. The golden light had deepened, painting long shadows across the floor, wrapping the room in a hushed glow that made everything feel sacred. I moved to sit at the desk beside hers, not across the room where students usually sat, but close enough that the space between us felt intentionally narrowed. She glanced at me, and for a heartbeat, she seemed about to protest. But instead, she let out a soft laugh and shook her head. "You're stubborn," she said. "Only when it matters," I replied. Her hand rested on the edge of the desk, close enough that I could see the faint lines of her skin, the slight tremble that hadn't been there before. Slowly, hesitantly, she let her fingers drift the smallest distance, until they came to rest lightly on my forearm. Not firm, not claiming, just a touch, tentative and human. The warmth of it spread through me, calming and electrifying all at once. I turned my hand so my fingers brushed hers in return, and she didn't pull away. For a long moment, we simply sat like that, our hands barely touching, the silence wrapping around us like a fragile secret. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The quiet, the closeness, the softness of her touch, all of it said more than words could carry. Eventually, the light faded to a dusky glow, and I knew the day was ending. But for the first time, leaving didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the start of something delicate and rare, something built not on rushed declarations, but on moments like this, quiet, patient, real. When she finally let her hand slip away, she gave me one last look, her eyes steady, her smirk returning just slightly. "Go on," she whispered, though her tone carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. I rose, the book still tucked under my arm, and nodded. "Until next time." And as I stepped out into the hallway, I knew, whatever name we gave it, the class we had begun together was far from over. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to leave a like and share it with someone who loves slow burn romance as much as you do. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, subscribe and stay with me for the next chapter of love, longing, and connection. 6.